Many people ask on a mobilization or a deployment, what would allow the non-custodial parent to change custody? Now, this is something that, again, if you deal with how mobilizations or deployments will be handled in that initial document, no one's going to have those questions when the service member has a mobilization. That might require the child to change households. But not all modifications can be avoided. So if you don't have that in your original decree, you may need to look at a modification of that document to include an agreement that both parties can agree upon, because that can be done at any time. However, it's more expensive. You have to go back into court, file the other documents, but there is no ironclad solution. It can be looked at as a change of circumstances. So any deployment or mobilization may be looked at by state law as a change of circumstances for that child that would allow a parent to go in and request a modification of a current custody decree. There are certain states that have protections for military custody situations. Right now, the military custody situation laws vary by state very widely. So you'll have to look at what is your state, does it have protections? If so, what are they? And do those protections apply in your situation? Again, work with your attorney on figuring out what protections may apply. Another question that people frequently have is, how can I prevent my child from having to live with a non-custodial parent during deployment? So if this is the situation, if a parent is worried about their child's well-being or wants to know how they can prevent their child from having to go live with a non-custodial parent, there may be nothing that can be done in that circumstance. Both parents have rights as natural parents to the custody or the visitation of that child. So merely disliking another parent, or the fact that the parent hasn't been as involved as another parent in that child's life, is not going to legally keep that child from going to the non-custodial parent or the other parent if that other parent is willing to do that. So in many situations, if there is a custodial parent who is in the service and they're the primary parent, the other parent may not have been very involved in the child's life, and then at the point of the military deployment for the primary parent, that other parent may step up and say, oh, I want my child now, I want my child to come live with me. In most situations, unless that parent has given up their legal parental rights or needs to establish initial custody or visitation, there may not be anything that the parent can do, the custodial parent can do, to keep that child from that other parent. So that's important to understand. However, if there are legitimate concerns regarding the ability of the other parent to care for the child, that is something that would endanger the child, something very serious, those concerns should certainly be brought forward to either your attorney or the authorities, whatever is appropriate. Another question that custodial parents or military parents frequently have is, how can I ensure that my child is able to spend time with family members on my side of the family when I'm on deployment? So in the event that a family member is very influential in that child's life, or maybe a service member is remarried, has a new spouse, a step-parent, maybe some additional children. There are often situations where the former spouse or the other parent may not get along with that current spouse or other members of the service member's family. And when the child moves to be with that other parent during the deployment or during that situation of military absence, they may not want those family members to visit with the child. Now that can be very disruptive to the child. So in certain situations, you definitely want to look at the best interests of the child. And that's something that the court is really going to take into consideration too if it gets to that point. If the person or people in that child's life are very significant, it may be a question of stability for that child and it being in the best interest of the child for them to continue to have those people involved in their lives. The easiest and best way to handle a situation like that, though, is for the parents to agree based on the best interests of the child, that they should continue to see the people and have the surroundings that they have had throughout their growing up. So if they're having to switch parents during a military deployment, it's normally very important to keep as much stability for that child as possible for their well-being and for their happiness and their mental health during that parent's deployment. If they're able to see their friends, see people who are important in their life, important family members to them, that can really help them to get through a parent's deployment successfully. And so this is something that should also be considered up front when you're looking at how custody or visitation will be handled during a military deployment. You also want to look at what considerations do we need specifically for that child. Are there family members or other considerations? Maybe you want to ensure that your child is able to stay in their sports team, in their soccer team or their hockey team, if that's something that's available, if both parents live basically within the same local area, to ensure, again, that stability for the child. Those are things that can be looked at and included in the original decree.